Hey there guys, I'm Renee. I am the owner and artist behind Chicly Reclaimed Decor, and welcome back to another tutorial. Today I'm going to be taking you through the process of how I created this mixed media piece of furniture art entitled Pennies from Heaven. I'm going to be taking you through the process of how I layered molds, decoupage paper, stencils, textures, and much more to completely redesign this jewelry armoire. And I'm also going to be sharing with you how to create this aged copper patina finish. So if that is something you're interested in learning, stick around because that is what I'll be going over today. Remember, prep work is key. So after removing the hardware, I gave this piece a thorough cleaning using undiluted simple green, and then I gave it a good scuff sand with a 240 grit sandpaper to rough it up the surface and to prepare it for this paint makeover to come. Remember to wipe off any residual dust after sanding with a damp rag before moving on to the next step. The inspiration behind this design came from this beautiful Celestial Gaze decoupage paper by Whimsical Designs, and I'm going to design this entire jewelry armoire around it. I will be using a variety of molds, starting with this heat bendable IFlex wood trim that I'll be using to accent the top and the bottom on this piece. I am going to be using a heat gun, but you can use a blow dryer as well, and I'm going to be warming up this trim slowly. And I am going to let gravity assist me in this process, as you can see here. I will put a full list of products used down in the description below, just in case I inspire you to pick up a paintbrush and do a little creating of your very own. So up next, now that my trim is unrolled, I'm going to cut this to fit on the bottom of my jewelry armoire. When doing a project like this, a measuring tape is going to be your best friend to achieve an all-around even design. Like the old saying goes, measure twice, cut once, which is super important when you only have so much product to work with. And this golden rule saved my bacon here because my first measurement was totally incorrect. So take the time to go through this step, you won't regret it. Once I have my trim measured and marked with a straight line, I'm going to warm it up again before cutting it with just a pair of kitchen scissors. I'm going to measure and cut 3 pieces, one for each side here on the bottom. And again, I like to sand these edges smooth with a fine grit sandpaper before moving on to the process of gluing this trim in place using Tight Bond Quick and Thick. Now I know I'm using quite a few molds to create this ornate design, and a few people are gonna ask me why? Why spend the time and why spend the money on the molds? Well, for me, I love to work with ornate carved pieces, but most of which are just out of my price range to acquire, even secondhand in my area. And really, I honestly just love the process of designing and creating a detailed and truly one-of-a-kind item like this. To me, this is a form of art, and it's my favorite type to create. So let me know down in the comments why you personally like to work with molds. As you can see, I followed the same process to warm up and then wrap this IFlex wood trim around the top, and then I used clamps to secure it in place. Once dry, I came back through and I sanded back the edge, so that way it was nice and smooth and also flush with the edge of the door. One last piece was cut and added to the center here, and I made sure that this mold was level when I added it. That way it wouldn't obstruct the top from being able to close properly. Let's talk about the placement of your decoupage image for just a minute. It is so important to think ahead during this step. Here you can see that I'm measuring to try to determine where my hardware will be placed later on down the road. I'm doing this because I don't want to get to the very end of my project and find that I've placed a knob right in the middle of her eye or something like that, which is just going to really detract from this project that you worked so hard on. So after I had done some measuring, I figured out exactly where to add my image without having any issues. I'm using Paint Couture's Italian Ivory to lay down a white base for this image to go over so all the details and colors can clearly show through. To apply this decoupage paper, you can use a Topcoat, Mod Podge, or something similar. And I am going to be working a section at a time. I am brushing the top coat on the surface under 1/2, and then I'm going to use what I call my little blue tool, or a tool that has a straight edge to press down the rice paper. You can use plastic wrap to do this as well. Then I'm going to follow the same process for the other half, and I'm going to finish by brushing the top coat over the entire image. I then will need to cut this paper to separate the drawers, and I like to use a sharp razor blade to do this. I'm going to carefully and slowly cut it right where the drawers meet, and then I just make sure to add more top coat to that edge and press it in place. Next up, I'm going to be using this stencil by Ciao and Paint Couture's Embossing Medium. This is an acrylic plaster to create a raised stencil design and some really awesome texture. I'm going to lay down my stencil, making sure to overlap it on the edge of the decoupage paper, and then spread this product over top, wiping back any excess before pulling it off. By overlapping over the edge of the decoupage paper, it's going to not only create a great element of design, but it will also allow me to easier blend in this image later on when painting. For the texture, I am just stipling or dabbing it on the edges here using my finger or a small wooden tool. This is actually from a Redesign with Prima transfer kit, but just play around and see what application gets you the texture that you like the most. Speaking of texture, if you want to try a really cool way to add some variation to your texture design, try adding some embossing medium before you lay down your stencil. Then add your product as you normally would, but check out this cool texture that's achieved when you lift off your stencil. Then I'm just going to continue with the process of adding texture here by dabbing this embossing medium, concentrating on adding it heavier here on the corners and the edges for that patina that we will be adding later on down the road. I'm going to add this texture and stencil to the entirety of this jewelry armoire, including on the legs. But I'm just going to use any leftover embossing medium that is on my hands because I don't want this texture to be as heavy as it is on the rest of the piece. Once the texture was down, I'm going to move on to the mold work, and I'm going to be using Paint Couture's 2-part rapid casting resin to make some of these cherub and Art Deco accents. I like to weigh out my resin, so I'm going to weigh out equal portions of both step 1 and step 2 before mixing thoroughly for about 30 seconds and then pouring. After 10 minutes, you are ready to demold. Thanks so much for watching up to this point, and I hope you're enjoying the content. If you're new to my channel and are interested in more DIY tutorials, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload new tutorials. I'm going to be using some of these molds to construct a border around that decoupage paper that we added earlier. And when I'm coming up with the design, I will play around with the placement of the molds, and then I will take photos to keep track of all the different designs, as you will see here in a minute, until I find the one that I like the most. Again, I'm going to be doing some measuring to make sure my molds are even and symmetrical on both sides. And for this frame, I measured to find the middle of these drawers and started by gluing my cherub mold there because I'm going to be working from here outward. For this top set of molds, I'm going to need to cut them in order for this drawer to open. So I'm going to add these resin cast molds directly to my piece after casting them. This way they're still a bit soft and I can more easily cut through them. Unfortunately for me, the penny molds were cured, so I used a heat gun to warm them up, and then I cut them in half with a sharp knife. I also sanded the edges before continuing with the gluing process. As you can see, I added an IFlex rope trim, and here I'm using a sharp knife to cut it after warming it up, and then I am going to pull these drawers out and sand back that mold so that way they don't obstruct these drawers from opening and closing. Once my mold work was officially complete, I added a coat of primer to the resin moldings, and then I moved on to the next step. I'm going to be using Carbon. This is a dark gray color by Couture. This is part of their acrylic mineral line of paint, and it has a built-in primer and top coat, so it provides a very durable finish. And I'm going to be using this to lay down a dark base color as well as to blend in this decoupage image. I'm going to be utilizing quite a few dry brushing techniques. This is where you have very little paint on your brush, and then with a very soft hand, you brush over top of your design. I'm doing that along the edges of the decoupage paper to blend it in, wiping back any of this paint color that goes on too thick. Right here is a good example of the technique that I'm using. I start by having my paintbrush fully loaded, and I'm brushing the paint on the outside rope trim and edge. Then after most of that paint is off my brush, I start by lightly brushing over top of the raised stencil and the decoupage paper to subtly blend that in. And these are the results after blending in that decoupage image with the Carbon paint color. And then I'm just going to continue, like I said, to add 2 coats of this paint to the remainder of this jewelry box. So next up, we're going to add some areas of white to this jewelry armoire, again using Italian ivory. I want to add this color mainly on the corners and on some areas on the outside of the trim, because my inspiration behind this design is an aged copper penny. And I have seen some that have that kind of white powdery type of age mixed in with the greens. So that's what I'm trying to mimic here with this Italian ivory paint. I found that the real trick for me personally to achieve an aged paint look is to toggle back and forth between adding layers of dark and light paint, or vice versa. So bear with me, because this piece is going to be getting quite a few distressed layers of paint from here on out to achieve the weathered copper inspired patina look that I am going for. I'm going to be doing a 2-tone blend to mimic the look of an old penny. I'm going to be using this custom mixed dark green and this autumn sage. Both of these are part of the chalk style line of paint by Couture. And I'm going to be doing what I call a dirty blend, meaning this does not need to be perfect. In fact, I want the white and I want the black to be showing through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my light green color to the middle and my dark color on the outside. I have a paintbrush for each color, and I'm adding the lighter green in the middle and the darker green on the outside. Then I'm going to lightly mist with water and use a neutral blending brush, or a brush that has no paint on it. And I'm going to use it to brush over that dividing line in a back and forth motion from left to right here on the top, and then up and down here on the sides. I'm a very heavy-handed person, so for me, the key to blending was learning to use light brush strokes. And I was really happy with that highlight we got in the middle on the first blend, so I'm going to let that dry and move on to the front. For the legs, I want them to be blended from light to dark, so I'm adding the dark green color onto the top, and here I'm coming through with the light chalk style color, and I am adding it onto the bottom, and I'm simply just brushing it upward into that green. Like I said earlier, we're not going for perfection here. We want an aged style paint look, so I'm not covering up a lot of that white and black that we added earlier. And for this middle blend, I want there to be, again, that highlight in the middle. So I'm adding the light color in the middle. I'm putting the dark green on either side of that paint. And then again, I'm going to take my neutral blending brush, and I am going to brush very gently right at that dividing line. And I'm going to follow the same process as earlier to blend in this decoupage paper. I'm dry brushing along that texture and the decoupage image to blend it in with the green, and I'm being heavier handed along the outside of the image. You'll see here in just a bit that I actually came back through and I wiped back some of the green that I had added over the top because, like I said, I really want this white to be showing through. And then I just continued on with that blend here on the sides as well. Once that first coat of paint had time to dry, I came back through and did a second blend over the entire jewelry box. This aged paint finish is all about the layers. So next up, I'm going to dry brush the Italian ivory color over this entire design. Remember to offload the majority of your paint before doing this technique, otherwise you will not get this desired effect. As you can see, it's catching on all that texture, the stencil work, and of course, the molds. Now we're going to go back to using that darker carbon color. For this technique, I'm going to be adding this paint and using it almost as a type of glaze. I'm brushing it randomly on the trim as well as the mold work, and then I'm getting very close with my misting bottle and spraying it down thoroughly. This is a really great way to add an aged paint look to the trim as well as to the mold work. As you can see, I'm using a rag to wipe off the drips, and I'm using my own artistic discretion here as to how much of this I leave on and take off. Next up, I'm going to be cutting up these gilded floral rub-on transfers by Redesign with Prima to add some white flowers to this design. Once I have cut out my transfers and I have a design in mind, I'm going to remove the white backing and place this transfer where I would like. Then I'm going to burnish over top of the entire design with the little wooden stick that comes with. Then I'm going to start working from one side of the design to slowly pull the plastic off, burnishing as I go along, leaving the transfer behind, and then I just use a razor to cut the transfer if need be to be able to open the drawer. Once cut, just remember to burnish that edge. And to keep with the aged design of this piece, I took a fine grit sandpaper and I distressed these images. I love being able to add your own hand-painted elements to decoupage designs. So here I'm using a white paint pen to do just that. I'm adding some highlights to this design on the roses, her hair, wings, and on some other areas. And these are the results so far. We just have one last layer of light color paint to dry brush over the molds and the erased stencil design to again add that highlight. Next up, I'm going to be using this Bronze Perfect pigment powder and a high gloss top coat to mix up my own heavily pigmented metallic paint for the patina part of this project. I'm going to follow the same process to dry brush this color over the molds, texture, and on some of the stencil designs. Dry brushing can take quite some time just due to the nature of the technique, but with this super pigmented product, I get the results I want almost immediately. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial where I shared with you how to create this mixed media piece of furniture art entitled Pennies from Heaven. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you are new here, and I hope I've inspired you to pick up a paintbrush and do a little creating of your very own.